Welcome. What you are about to watch is not science fiction, and it is not folklore. It is a serious investigation into one of history's most compelling unresolved questions, the mystery of the Piltdown Man Hoax, how a fake fossil fooled science for 41 years and distorted human evolution research. Across the world, in universities, research institutes, and field excavations, serious scholars are wrestling with evidence that does not fit the accepted story. Evidence that has been documented, measured, and peer-reviewed, and that still has no satisfying conventional explanation. We are going to look at that evidence carefully, without prejudice in either direction, not dismissing what is extraordinary, but not accepting it without scrutiny either. The truth, as always, is in the details. In 1912, a British lawyer and amateur archaeologist named Charles Dawson announced one of the greatest discoveries in the history of paleoanthropology: the fossil remains of the missing link between apes and humans. Found in a gravel pit near Piltdown Common in East Sussex, England, the fossils appeared to show a creature with a large, human-like braincase and an ape-like jaw, exactly the combination that the prevailing evolutionary theory of the time predicted for a transitional human ancestor. The scientific world was electrified. The specimen was named Eoanthropus dawsoni, Dawson's Dawn Man, and it was accepted as genuine by the British Museum of Natural History, by the most eminent anatomists and evolutionary biologists of the era, and by the scientific establishment of the most scientifically advanced nation on Earth. For 41 years, Piltdown Man distorted the science of human evolution. Research that should have led to understanding of the true course of human evolution was instead sidetracked by the false template provided by the Piltdown specimen. When fossil finds in Africa suggested human ancestors with small brains and upright posture, the opposite of what Piltdown predicted, they were initially dismissed or marginalized because they didn't fit the Piltdown pattern. The Tong child, discovered by Raymond Dart in 1924 and representing Australopithecus africanus, a genuine human ancestor, was ridiculed partly because its anatomy was inconsistent with the Piltdown model of large brain preceding upright locomotion. In 1953, a team of scientists led by Joseph Weiner, Kenneth Oakley, and Wilfrid LaGrose Clark applied modern fluorine dating and anatomical analysis to the Piltdown fossils and established definitively that they were a fraud. The skull was from a medieval human, the jaw was from an orangutan, and the teeth had been chemically treated and mechanically filed to produce an aged appearance. The hoax was exposed with startling clarity, but the identity of the hoaxer has never been definitively established, and the mystery of who committed the greatest scientific fraud in history and why remains genuinely open more than 70 years after the exposure. This is where our investigation begins. Stay with us, because the further we go into the evidence, the more extraordinary it becomes. The story you think you know is only the surface. Beneath it lies something far more remarkable. Let us begin. Before we go further, if you are finding this investigation compelling, please take a moment right now to like this video, drop a comment below with your thoughts, and share it with someone who loves a good historical mystery. If you are watching on YouTube, hit subscribe and tap the bell icon so you never miss a new episode. If you found us through Facebook, tap follow on our page. It takes just a few seconds, and it genuinely helps us keep making these documentaries. Now, let us get back to the investigation. Before we examine the specific evidence, we need to step back and understand the context. This case does not exist in isolation. It sits within the landscape of modern documented mysteries, and to properly evaluate what we are looking at, we need to understand the broader picture that surrounds it. The 20th and 21st centuries were supposed to be the age of answers. Science had decoded DNA, split the atom, put humans on the moon, and mapped the genome. By the logic of accelerating discovery, every mystery should be converging toward explanation. And yet the ledger of genuinely unexplained phenomena, events witnessed by credible observers, investigated by serious researchers, and still lacking a satisfying account, has not shrunk. If anything, it has grown. Part of this is a failure of classification. Phenomena that do not fit established categories tend to be dismissed rather than investigated, filed under anecdotal or mass hysteria, and removed from serious consideration. This is not always wrong. Genuine hoaxes and misperceptions account for a large portion of anomalous reports. But the dismissal is sometimes premature, and the cost is real. Cases that might have yielded genuine insight are closed before they are fully examined. Witnesses are discredited. Evidence is lost. The question is never properly asked. The cases that endure, that survive rigorous scrutiny, and still refuse to yield to conventional explanation, are a small but significant set. They share certain characteristics: multiple independent witnesses, physical evidence consistent with witness testimony, and a complete absence of any plausible prosaic explanation that accounts for all the data. These are not ghost stories. They are open problems in empirical science, waiting for someone with the right tools and the intellectual courage to take them seriously. This context matters because it tells us something important. What we are about to investigate is not an isolated curiosity. It is part of a pattern that researchers in multiple fields have been independently documenting for decades, and patterns in science demand explanation. With that foundation in place, let us now turn to the specific case at hand. Now we reach the heart of the matter. The core evidence surrounding the Piltdown Man hoax, how a fake fossil fooled science for 41 years and distorted human evolution research, is more extensive, more verified, and more troubling for conventional explanations than most people realize. Let us walk through it systematically, fact by fact, and allow the evidence to speak for itself. We are not going to speculate here. Every point that follows is documented in peer-reviewed publications, official archaeological records, or government archives that are publicly accessible. The question is not whether these facts are real. The question is what they mean. Consider this first extraordinary detail. Charles Dawson, 1864–1916, presented the first Piltdown fragments to Arthur Smith, Woodward of the British Museum in 1912, claiming to have found them in a gravel pit on his client's property at Barkham Manor near Piltdown, WN, East Sussex. Over the following 2 years, additional fossil fragments were found at the Piltdown site, including teeth and some animal remains. Dawson died in 1916, and no new Piltdown material was found at the original site after his death. A second Piltdown site, Piltdown Roman II, was later claimed by Dawson, but was never independently located, and material from this claimed site is now considered part of the hoax. This single data point, if taken in isolation, might be set aside. Anomalies happen, instruments malfunction, researchers make mistakes, but as we continue, you will see that this is not an isolated anomaly. It is part of a consistent and documented pattern. But that is only the beginning. Researchers also discovered the scientific acceptance of Piltdown Man was not universal from the start. American anatomist Jarrett Miller independently analyzed the specimens in 1915 and concluded the jaw was from an ape and was not associated with the skull. French paleontologist Marcellin Boule reached a similar conclusion. David Waterston at King's College London also doubted the association of jaw and skull. However, these dissenting voices were marginalized partly by the prestige of the British Museum's endorsement and partly by the Piltdown specimen's apparent perfect fit with prevailing British evolutionary theory, which expected a large brain to precede other human characteristics. Now, a skeptic might propose an alternative explanation for teeth. His and that is entirely reasonable. We should always test alternative explanations before accepting extraordinary ones. The problem is that the alternative explanations, when examined carefully, create more problems than they solve. The mystery deepens when we examine the 1953 exposure by Weiner, Oakley, and LaGrose-Clark used multiple converging methods. Fluorine dating, based on the principle that bones absorb fluorine from surrounding groundwater over time, with older bones containing more fluorine. showed that the skull and jaw had very low fluorine concentrations, consistent with recent, not ancient, origin. X-ray analysis of the jaw showed its internal structure was that of a young orangutan. Microscopic examination of the teeth showed they had been mechanically filed to give them a more human-like wear pattern, with the filing marks still visible under magnification. Chemical analysis found evidence of potassium bichromate and iron sulfate treatment consistent with artificial aging. This is where the conventional account begins to strain. Each individual fact might be dismissed or minimized in isolation. But the cumulative weight of the evidence is another matter entirely. Perhaps most remarkable of all, the prime suspect for the Piltdown hoax has long been Charles Dawson, whose history includes multiple other suspected archaeological frauds. Researchers have documented at least 38 cases where Dawson made discoveries that were subsequently questioned, including forged medieval tiles, a claimed discovery of a Roman statuette, and a claimed first edition of a text that was demonstrably printed long after the claimed date. A 2016 study by Isabelle de Groot and colleagues, which used CT scanning and DNA analysis of the Piltdown specimens, concluded that all Piltdown material from both claimed sites was created from the same small pool of source material, specifically what appeared to be a single orangutan and a single medieval human, strongly implicating a single forger who controlled all the material, pointing back to Dawson. Researchers who have examined this evidence have described it as genuinely difficult to explain within the accepted framework. These are not fringe commentators. They are credentialed academics publishing in mainstream journals, raising questions that the field has not yet satisfactorily answered. Then there is the matter of other suspects for the Piltdown hoax have included Arthur Conan Doyle, who wrote The Lost World in 1912 and had knowledge of the Piltdown area. Pierre Teilhard de Chardin, a French Jesuit priest and paleontologist who was present at some of the excavations and was later prominent in both science and theology, and Arthur Smith Woodward himself, though his genuine scientific reputation makes him a less probable suspect. The Conan Doyle theory, developed by John Hathaway Winslow and Alfred Mayer in 1983, proposed that Doyle planted the evidence as an elaborate revenge on the scientific establishment for its dismissal of his interest in spiritualism. This theory, though colorful, lacks direct evidence. What makes this particularly significant is its independence from the previous points. This is not a case of one theory requiring another. These are separate lines of evidence converging on the same uncomfortable conclusion. Adding to the enigma is this finding: the impact of the Piltdown fraud on the actual course of paleoanthropological research has been carefully documented. Raymond Dart's 1924 discovery of the Taung child in South Africa, which actually represented a genuine early human ancestor, Australopithecus africanus, was initially met with skepticism, partly because its anatomy, small brain, upright posture, was inconsistent with the Piltdown model of what a human ancestor should look like. Dart spent years defending his discovery against doubters influenced by the Piltdown template. The true history of human evolution, which involved African small-brained ancestors, not the British large-brained ape-jawed creature of Piltdown, was delayed in recognition by the fraud. Taken together, these facts form a pattern that cannot be explained by coincidence, misidentification, or methodological error. Each piece of evidence has been examined by skeptics. Each has been subjected to alternative explanations. And in each case, the alternative explanation falls short of accounting for everything that has been documented. We are left with a body of evidence that demands explanation and an accepted narrative that does not provide one. This is where serious inquiry begins. Now that we have established the evidence, we need to examine the theories that researchers have proposed to explain the Piltdown Man hoax, how a fake fossil fooled science for 41 years and distorted human evolution research. This is where the debate becomes most intense, because the theories reflect not just different interpretations of the same evidence, but fundamentally different assumptions about what is possible and what the past looked like. Understanding these theories is not just an academic exercise. Each one has been championed by serious researchers with genuine credentials, and each one captures something that the others miss. The truth, if it is ever established, will likely draw on elements of several. The first major explanation proposed by researchers holds that the Dawson solo fraud theory, now the majority scholarly position, holds that Charles Dawson created the Piltdown hoax alone, motivated by a desire for scientific recognition and the professional status that a major discovery would bring. Dawson had made multiple smaller fraudulent discoveries throughout his career, suggesting a pattern of fabrication for personal advancement. He had access to the materials, anatomical knowledge, chemical treatment expertise, and connections that gave him access to ape and human skeletal material. The 2016 CT scanning and DNA studies finding that all Piltdown material came from the same small source pool is the strongest evidence for a single forger, and Dawson is the one person who had access to all the material at all times. This interpretation has significant academic support and is backed by substantial evidence, but it is not without problems. Critics point out that it requires assumptions that go beyond what the evidence strictly supports, and that key predictions of this theory have not been confirmed by subsequent research. It remains contested, and the contest is productive. A rival school of thought argues that the conspiracy theory holds that Dawson was not acting alone, but was assisted by one or more scientific insiders who had professional motives for establishing Britain's priority in human evolution discoveries. Under this model, the British Museum's Arthur Smith Woodward may have known or suspected the material was fraudulent, but chose to promote it for reasons of national prestige and personal scientific standing. A conspiracy version is supported by the observation that some aspects of the hoax, the chemical treatment of the specimens, the sophisticated aging techniques, suggest professional laboratory knowledge beyond what an amateur archaeologist might possess. This theory is controversial, and deliberately so. Its proponents argue that the evidence demands an explanation outside the conventional framework. Critics counter that extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence, and that the evidence presented, while suggestive, does not yet meet that standard. The debate continues in peer-reviewed literature. Perhaps the most unconventional theory suggests that the opportunistic fraud theory proposes that Dawson found a genuine but unimportant fragment of ancient skull in the gravel pit, and then deliberately enhanced the find by adding an orangutan jaw to make it appear more significant. Under this model, there was a real ancient human skull present at the site, but the association with the ape jaw was entirely Dawson's fabrication. This theory attempts to explain why the skull material shows somewhat different aging characteristics than the jaw, and it positions Dawson as a fraudster who started with something real and elaborated on it. What is striking about this debate is not merely that experts disagree. That is normal and healthy in science. What is striking is the quality of the disagreement. Serious researchers, working from the same body of evidence, reaching genuinely different conclusions. That level of fundamental disagreement, when it persists over decades, is a signal that something important has not yet been understood. The question is not which of these theories is right. The question is whether any of them is right, or whether the truth is something that none of the current frameworks has yet been able to capture. The case surrounding the Piltdown Man Hoax, how a fake fossil fooled science for 41 years and distorted human evolution research, does not rest on speculation alone. What distinguishes this investigation from pure mythology is the existence of documented, physical, verifiable evidence, material that has been examined by credentialed researchers and whose authenticity is not seriously disputed. What is disputed is its interpretation. Let us review the most significant documented evidence as objectively as possible. We are not going to cherry-pick the data that supports a preferred conclusion. We are going to lay out what exists and let you draw your own assessment. Physical evidence supporting this account includes the 2016 study by de Groot and colleagues at the Natural History Museum, using advanced CT scanning and ancient DNA analysis, is the most definitive scientific analysis of the Piltdown specimens. The CT scanning revealed previously undetected details of the modifications, particularly the packing material used to create a more human-like tooth shape, and showed that the modifications were systematic and sophisticated. The ancient DNA analysis, which could not obtain viable DNA from the specimens due to the chemical treatment, confirmed the orangutan origin of the jaw material. The conclusion that all specimens from both Piltdown I and Piltdown Roman II came from the same small number of source individuals strongly supports a single forger who controlled all the material. This evidence has been subjected to independent verification. Skeptics have examined it. Alternative explanations have been proposed and tested. The data remains. The question of what it means remains open. Investigators have documented Dawson's documented history of other suspected frauds, compiled most thoroughly by Miles Russell in his 2004 book, The Piltdown Man Hoax. Case closed provides strong circumstantial evidence for his responsibility. Russell identified 38 separate cases where Dawson was involved with objects or discoveries that were subsequently shown or suspected to be fraudulent or misrepresented. The pattern of behavior across his career is consistent with a serial fabricator rather than an isolated incident of fraud, and the systematic nature of the Piltdown deception is consistent with an experienced practitioner. This evidence has been subjected to independent verification. Skeptics have examined it. Alternative explanations have been proposed and tested. The data remains. The question of what it means remains open. On-site analysis revealed the fluorine dating and chemical analysis that exposed the fraud in 1953 provided the irrefutable physical evidence that ended 41 years of scientific acceptance. The finding that the skull and jaw contained amounts of fluorine consistent with burial of only a few hundred years rather than several 100,000 years, combined with the anatomical evidence that they were not associated, established the fraud beyond reason. Able scientific doubt. The physical exposure of the hoax is thus itself a piece of evidence about how the deception was carried out. The specimens were not ancient fossils, but recent materials treated to appear ancient. This evidence has been subjected to independent verification. Skeptics have examined it. Alternative explanations have been proposed and tested. The data remains. The question of what it means remains open. Each individual piece of evidence might, in principle, be explained away. A single anomalous artifact might be misidentified. A single anomalous date might reflect contamination. A single anomalous eyewitness account might reflect misperception. The question is whether all of the evidence can be explained away, and whether the explanations required are more or less plausible than the evidence itself. When multiple independent lines of inquiry converge on the same conclusion, that convergence is the most powerful signal in empirical science. And that is exactly what we are seeing here. We have examined the history, the evidence, and the theories surrounding the Piltdown Man hoax, how a fake fossil fooled science for 41 years and distorted human evolution research. Now we need to ask the question that is sometimes overlooked in discussions of ancient mysteries. Why does this matter? What does it mean for us today? It would be easy to file this away as an interesting historical curiosity, a puzzle from a distant past with no bearing on our present lives. That would be a fundamental mistake. The questions raised by this case touch on issues that are directly relevant to who we are, where we came from, and what the human story actually looks like before the period covered by conventional history. Piltdown Man remains a cautionary tale for the philosophy and sociology of science, cited regularly in discussions of how social, national, and personal biases can distort scientific judgment. The case is used in science education to illustrate why peer review and independent replication are essential, and why the prestige of an institution, like the British Museum, should not substitute for rigorous independent analysis. The Natural History Museum in London, which holds the original Piltdown specimens, has made them available for advanced analysis and acknowledges the fraud straightforwardly in its public communications. The 2016 study essentially closed the question of who the forger was, pointing definitively to Dawson. However, some researchers continue to argue for involvement of additional individuals, and the case is still occasionally the subject of academic debate. The history of Piltdown's effects on paleoanthropology, particularly its suppression of African human origins research for a generation, has made it a significant case study in the history of science and the politics of scientific knowledge. The true story of human evolution, centered on African ancestors, is now well established, in large part because the Piltdown template was demolished. Furthermore, the tools available to investigate these questions are advancing rapidly. Satellite imaging, ground-penetrating radar, ancient DNA analysis, isotopic tracing, and deep-sea sonar are all providing capabilities that previous generations of researchers could only dream of. Cases that were genuinely unresolvable 10 years ago are now open to new analysis, and the findings, consistently, are expanding rather than contracting the mystery. The investigation continues. New discoveries are being made. New analyses are being published. New voices are entering the conversation from disciplines that were not previously part of the discussion. The answers, when they come, and they will come, will not merely solve a historical puzzle. They will force a fundamental revision of assumptions that underpin our entire understanding of human history and human potential. We have now walked through the complete case of the Piltdown Man Hoax, how a fake fossil fooled science for 41 years and distorted human evolution research, from the historical record through the physical evidence, across the competing theories, and into the modern significance of what remains unresolved. What the story of Piltdown Man ultimately reveals is not just a historical puzzle. It is a mirror. It reflects our assumptions back at us, our assumptions about what ancient people were capable of, about how knowledge is gained and lost across the centuries, and about the relationship between what we know and what we merely think we know. The evidence presented in this documentary is real. The questions it raises are genuine. The debate among researchers is ongoing, and that is healthy. Science is not a set of conclusions. It is a process. And the process requires that we remain open to evidence that challenges what we thought we knew, however uncomfortable that challenge might be. If you came to this documentary as a skeptic, we hope the evidence gave you something to think about. If you came as a true believer, we hope the critical examination gave you a more nuanced picture. The truth, as always, lies in the evidence, not in what we want to be true. Thank you for watching. If this investigation sparked your curiosity, please help us reach more people. If you are watching on YouTube, subscribe to the channel and hit the notification bell so you never miss a new documentary. If you are watching on Facebook, tap the follow button on our page to stay connected. We publish new documentaries every week, covering the full range of historical mysteries that the mainstream has not yet adequately explained. Leave a comment telling us which case you want us to investigate next. The conversation continues. The investigation never ends.